is Linda. We're here with our podcast, and some of you may have already seen the first podcast I did with Justin Bortz, author of The Seventh Avatar, which is getting rave reviews, by the way. So check out Amazon for all those great reviews he has and to buy the book. But we had such a great time talking last time that I said we've got to do part two with it because we just didn't get a chance
Definitely.
to cover everything because there's a lot in this book. So I wanted to start by two of the things that really stood out to me about this book is how much it talks about religion and humor, and music is another big part of this. So in fact, it
Yeah.
was very timely that just yesterday I got invited to, or maybe the day before, I got invited to a webinar on humor and religion. So I thought it was really
Ah,
interesting that other people are talking about this too. So maybe you can start by telling us about the chapter called "The Funniest God Man on Planet Earth." I thought it's a very unusual chapter title, but let's start
yeah.
with that.
Instead of the funniest man on planet Earth, it's the funniest God man on planet Earth. So yeah, so the stage is that it's a dreary February day, February 1957, I believe, and Professor Albert Jones is teaching a class on um, pain and the difference, the consideration of the difference between what an animal experiences in pain, between what a human experiences with pain. And he cites the book, The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis, where C.S. Lewis talks a bit about how a dog is not able to step outside of itself in consciousness like a human being can, and therefore their experience of pain is different. And the class, it's a dreary day, everybody's sleepy, it's talking about pain, but all of a sudden, out of nowhere, John Franklin blurts out a joke. He says, did you hear the one about the dyslexic agnostic? He's not sure if there is a dog. So, it's a combination of agnostics, not sure if there's a God, and he's dyslexic, so he took the D and the G and switched them, and now it's dog. So, the class, like, there's this momentary pause. We're just kind of like shock, like, huh? What? And then all of a sudden, everybody burst out laughing. And then the humor like goes to another level when the professor falls over laughing because his stomach hurts so much, and it goes to this next level. And I say that it's like it's spread through the school like a highly transmittable virus. Like no one could stop it. It just spread. And next thing you know, everybody's falling over in the hallways. Nobody can teach any classes, and it's all because John Franklin cracked off this joke. Um, but what really took it to like a different esoteric level or consideration is that what happened simultaneous with this joke was this bill, this civil rights bill that was passed that very day. That was a real landmark. And then you wrote that paragraph very well, which talked much more about what happened, what was going on with this Civil Rights Act of 1957. And John later on is talking to his disciples and he tells them about this incident and what was going on. He said that he had been praying he had written this paper in ninth grade about prejudice, which won him an award, and he got to do a presentation in front of the school. And by the way, that's based on a real story of young Avatar Adi Da Samraj, who wrote a paper in high school about prejudice and won the award, presented it in front of class. So it's in this particular case, it's like parallel with the real true life story of Adi Da Samraj. But anyway, so John said that he was aware, or he had been praying for this change in civil rights and on this issue of prejudice and bigotry ever since he wrote the paper in ninth grade. And I say he was praying on a level that only a God man was capable, where conscious light takes form, just, high esoteric stuff. But that he was aware on a conscious level that there was a shift and a lightening of consciousness because this bill was passed. And we can kind of take that and write it right into humor and religion and God, because it's this lifting consciousness that is what this joke that he pulled off, that was what was he was riding on. That was the wave that his joke was riding on that made it so contagious. So the whole concept of humor um, is kind of like it's kind of like, okay, so they say that when I've heard that when an individual throughout history, when individuals have realized a degree of enlightenment, whether it be sainthood or something, more, that they laugh a lot. They crack up, and a part of, I think, the reason, I think there's a obviously a physiological thing that's happening, like a release, a sense of release and relief that causes the laughter. Um, but I think there's also just kind of like a realization of just how silly all of the struggle and all of the unnecessary suffering was all happening. Like there's a realization of like its unnecessariness,
Yeah.
and that's funny. It's like, oh my God, just like what was all wrapped up in, what I was all a mess about, whatever, for all these years was just so ridiculous that I am now laughing about it. I'm cracking up about it. So yeah, it was a fun chapter to write.
Right.
And
This reminds me so much of years ago, I heard somebody say in the Christian scriptures that there are several places where it says Jesus wept and no place where it said Jesus laughed. And the answer that I saw to that was, it's not necessary to say Jesus laughed. We presume that he laughed. He was a human being. He had friends. He had good times with his friends. So
I have a
obviously
different
he
answer to
laughed.
that.
We don't have to say it. It's
Well,
just
I just
natural.
I think there's a different answer for that, and I know it's a little more controversial, but Jesus only had a year and a half to teach.
Well,
You know,
yeah, that's
Jesus
true.
had a year and a half to teach. Buddha had a whole lifetime. Krishna had a whole
Right.
lifetime. Even Adi Da Samraj had 69 years.
Wow.
And there's a ton of humor. I can tell you that whenever I watch videos of Adi Da, I always crack up. He's hysterical. And there's stories of him cracking off jokes where people laugh for hours. Like nobody could stop laughing because
Right.
and he also said that there's levels of humor, genius, right? And then an enlightened master is the highest level of comedic genius.
Hmm.
Like people like Jim Carrey and, some of the great comedians, Robin Williams of the last, say, 30 years, right? There are different levels of genius that are going on there comedically, you know? And the various stand-up comics and stuff. There's some really, really good ones that have been out there, where they come at things with an angle that's like, what the heck? I never heard that one before. But so there's this understanding that the enlightened master actually is the highest level of comedic genius
Hmm.
that is possible.
That's
Comedic
really,
mastery.
really
Yeah. So
interesting. Yeah.
but I think that I think it would have been really nice if there was talk about Jesus laughing. I don't know that
Well,
it is so assumed, like you
well, I
assume.
talked about it in some of my books where he has a sense of humor. But
I would
I
say he
think
would
that's just such a
completely
good point.
complete humor. In fact, there's this whole thought that God is pure humor.
Right.
That
Yeah.
God is pure humor. One of the aspects of God is pure humor. So, but anyway, so go on, please.
The other thing that I think was maybe a little bit controversial too is that we often get misinterpretations that religion and science are at odds with each other. And I was kind of fascinated with the story of Donald Tuturman because here in your book, we see that there is no difference. There's nothing controversial about science and religion. They can blend together very well. So, do you want to talk a little bit about Donald and his part in this
And
book?
his experience? Sure. So Donald is this character who is a child prodigy of astrophysics, and he graduated with honors as a 19-year-old, and he is a friend of his calls him and says, "You won't believe what I just read on the back of this book by this religious teacher." He says it's a quote from Stephen Nils. And Donald is like, wait, Stephen Nils, like the Stephen Nils, the one who we practically worship in the science community, like the super highly regarded scientist. And he's like, yeah. And so he goes on to read what Stephen Nils says on the back review of this book by Franklin Jones. What did I call it? The Love Electron, I think. Yeah, I think it was the Love Electron. Yeah, and I could actually read that if I can find it quick. So the reaction that Donald has um, upon reading or hearing this quote that is on the back of this book. Okay, so all right, here we go. So Dr. Nielsen's review said, John Franklin is vibrating at the speed of light, capital L, light. As crazy as that sounds, it is not only my objective observation, it was my experience while in his physical company. I could feel my cells vibrating, and I saw John Franklin as primary light, the very being of light. The science community will no doubt conclude that I have lost my marbles. Let them. At this point in my life, I would rather be happy than right. And when I'm around John, I am blissful. So it goes on. When Donald heard these words coming from the mouth of Dr. Nilsson, he had a bizarre reaction. He fell backwards, as if pushed by an invisible force, falling to the ground. His mind became unhinged, while his heart simultaneously blew wide open, and a feeling of great joy streamed through him from head to toe. Until that moment, Donald was an outspoken atheist.
Hmm.
So then Donald goes on to finally get to meet John and asks him a question about the Big Bang. But yeah, so that was fun to write. That was really fun to write.
Yeah. Well, you certainly have dealt with some really interesting and perhaps controversial topics in this book, but it seems like it's being received by every review I've seen about it is just amazing. Everybody is
Oh,
very
thank you.
impressed with it. But
Thank you.
one of the things that I think really was interesting in here, because I'm a lover of music, and music is always, I think, a part of a way of praising and worshiping and whatever. But
Yes. And yeah.
the music that you describe in here, transcendental punk, tell us about that and how that plays into this whole aspect.
Well, well, if you're going to talk about music in this story, you have to back up just a little bit to get to that point, I think. Um, the way I tie John's life passage and story to the Beatles, I think is one of the strongest, best parts of this book. So, and then I'll get to Transcendental Punk, which is very interesting. So John is telling his disciples, it's the 1970s, sometime maybe 77, I think, and he's telling his disciples the story of his influence and impact on the 1960s, right? So he he starts talking about the Beatles, and everybody goes nuts, because so many people love the Beatles, including me. And he tells them that when a story about his mom bringing home the album Meet the Beatles and his dad, and he's sitting there watching as the mom as Dolores dropped the needle down and out came I Want to Hold Your Hand. And it was like, he's like, it was all over, you know. We were like, the Beatles were part of our house from then on. And then he goes on to say that he went to see them when they arrived at LaGuardia Airport, and he and a bunch of his friends. And he said he felt so much love for the Beatles that he like felt like he was gonna like lift out of into the air, you know? And but he was also concerned about them because he knew the kind of the religious, political climate that they were coming into. So he was genuinely worried for their safety. So he began like a vigil of praying really hard for the Beatles and their protection. And he said he loved all four of them so deeply. And he said, and this is the part that's really like a lot of fun. He said he was praying for them when they were on the Ed Sullivan show, right? And he said that his prayers went out and affected everyone that was watching them on the Ed Sullivan show, to the point that it goes right into this folklore. And I don't know, Linda, if you've ever heard this folklore, that there were no crimes committed in our country the entire time that the Beatles played on the Ed
I,
Sullivan
I
show.
did not hear
Did
that.
you ever
No.
hear that?
No.
Yeah, it's like this folklore that lives out there, you
Oh.
know?
Hmm.
So I played right into that, right? And I'm saying that John was praying so hard for the Beatles, and his blessing was on them so heavily that when they played, that through their music, his blessing went out to everybody that was watching them, and it had such an impact that no crime was committed. And
Hmm.
then he knew that music was going to be the best way for him to reach the world. He knew it right then and there. Okay. So he said he continued blessing and praying in this vigil for the Beatles. And he said it spilled out into all of England, Great Britain, and fueled the whole British invasion,
Hmm.
right? So that was so much fun. Everybody went crazy, all his disciples, and it spilled out into this big party. But this idea that John Franklin, you know, the second coming of Christ, the Maitreya, the Kalki Avatar, the Mahdi, the Messiah, that he, through the Beatles, created the British invasion. It's
Wow.
just too much fun, just too much fun. And then he goes on to confess. One of his disciples brings in the record by the latest release by the Beatles of what was it? Not In My Life. A Day in the Life. A Day in the Life. He brings in the record A Day in the Life, and everybody like they listen to it like through the night over and over and over again, right? Because it's so amazing, right? So after it's all done and they're done, John says, I wrote that song, right?
Hmm.
I wrote that song. Okay. So it like, and everybody, and some people are like, I knew you wrote that song. And other people are like, huh? You know? And they had to like contemplate this idea. And I kind of roll it out into the story that like this idea that everything beautiful that exists in the world, like starting off with music, with Bach's most glorious melodies, most glorious works are from God, are divine, are creations of the divine, right? And so from then on out, like his followers try and guess songs that he quote wrote. And I put down a whole list. I had so much fun like coming up with this list of songs that God wrote, Rocky Mountain High by John Denver, and The First Time by Roberta Flack, and The Look of Love by Burt Bacharach, and all that stuff. But yeah, that was a blast. But this idea that we contemplate the divine most effectively through music, and I can say in my own life that that's 100% true for me. I mean, I cry a lot with music,
I'm glad I'm
listen.
not the only one. I have often
Uh,
burst into
I,
tears in church just listening to
uh,
some music that particularly moves
Yeah.
me.
No, yeah, I'm right there with you. So, okay, so this thing called transcendental punk. So it's it's the guy named JP, right? JP, but he's kind of me,
I was
because
going to say, I think he's really JB, Justin Bortz.
yeah, he's me, right? So there's this way that I roll my own life concept or idea or creation of transcendental punk. So so JP comes up with this idea of writing punk rock songs or using the punk rock um, art form, let's just say. And at one point, he quotes some other band and actually ends up being his future girlfriend's band. He quotes them that punk rock is like in theater, people can get naked, like in the show Hair. I believe everybody gets butt naked on the stage, and that's not pornography, right? That's not looked at as like bad or wrong or pornography. That's looked at as is an art form and as theater. And he said that's what punk rock is to music, like what that like theater is to pornography with regard to being getting naked. In other words, you can say anything in punk rock and it's okay. Okay, you can say anything. There's no limits. It's not in the least bit limited. So he uses that arena to bring out criticisms, mostly of Christianity, what he believes are childish notions that have become like accepted as fact or truth about Christianity and within Christianity. And he develops this thing called transcendental punk. And the idea is that at a transcendental punk concert, instead of like fog being blown out into the audience, incense is blown out into the audience. And it also brings this sensual element called goddess rock, which is another one of my creations, where you have these yoga dancers on raised platforms surrounding the center stage, and these women like yoga goddesses. They're up there moving and dancing. Everybody's around them dancing and moving. And you got the band in the middle, and they're playing this oftentimes very hard edged, very driving music that is criticizing, it's being outspoken about things that are kind of taboo. Like, there's a lot of bands in the world that go really dark. It's like it's okay to be dark in the world, but it's not okay to be bright and disagree with childish elements of religious viewpoints. You can say, F God, right? In some dark music and say God is dead and all this, all this angry, horrible stuff. That's okay. But you can't confront religious viewpoints. It's taboo. So JP has developed this new kind of music. He calls it transcendental punk. His band is called the Radical Deployment of Honesty. And other bands follow suit. And this becomes like a West Coast movement. And later in the story, JP has a vision in the middle of the night. He's sleeping, and he has a vision of John Franklin. He doesn't know anything about him. He knows nothing about him. He wakes up in the middle of the night. He's having this um, waking dream that's more real than reality itself, like what he calls super real, where he meets John Franklin. He experiences this incredible high love of John. He gets embraced by John. John proceeds to show him the horrors of the world, like terrible things that are happening in the world. And then he touches JP's heart in a way where JP realizes his eternal self. and feels comforted knowing, okay, I'm eternal, even though there's these terrible things happening. But then JP wakes up and he's a mess. He's crying. He can't stop crying because it's just way too much to process. Too much beauty, too much horror, too much everything. Um, he goes on a mission, a quest to find John, and it's really fun to see how he goes on this mission of like sort of like asking questions like, well, is there a do other religions have like the equivalent of a second coming of Christ? And he investigates it and he finds that yes, in fact, they do. Um, but anyway, he sets out on a quest, and long story short, he finally meets John. And he also meets the love of his life like 2 weeks before he meets John. So all these really amazing things are happening for JP. And a little bit later in the book, John brings JP and Genovese in for a special dinner where they finally get to formally meet and have a dinner together. And it's really special, this very, very special occasion. And John tells JP, this is something, if I could find it, I'd like to read it because I it was pretty neat what he says to him about transcendental punk and how this creation of this of this particular type of music was okay. Here it is. So this is John Franklin telling JP and Genovese where this transcendental punk idea and concept and concert how he sees it fitting in with his mission. So he said, okay, then John said, okay, there is a place in human consciousness that is stuck, more like imprisoned. And I would like your assistance, JP and Genovese, to help me set it free. In an enlightened society, it would be handled in a rites of passage ritual. But in the common world, there aren't any. It requires a leap into the dark unknown, taking a young boy around a difficult corner that starts him on a path to adulthood. Without it, there remains an element of childishness, which becomes narcissistic and petulant in the face of lordship and right guidance. I thought, wow, where did that come from? I don't even like know where I read after I wrote it and I came back to it at some point and I'm like, where did that come from? I don't even. So let me just repeat that last part. He says, without it, there remains an element of childishness, which becomes narcissistic and petulant in the face of lordship and right guidance.
Wow.
And he says, now I have found that the right kind of music, when combined with liberating dance, can achieve the same results as the rites of passage ritual. Your brand of punk rock, what you call transcendental punk, combined with the goddess rock principle of chakra manipulation, is a good fit. So,
Wow.
yeah, yeah, pretty crazy stuff.
Ah. Well, I guess one final question that I'd like to ask you is, and this may be impossible to answer even,
Oh
but
boy, it
out,
sounds like a good one.
out of all the different characters that are at play in this book, other than John Franklin, which character is kind of your favorite? And
Uh, let me think about that. Let me think about that one. I really like Clarice Staggart a lot.
hmm,
I like her character. She's really flirtatious, but she's strong and wise. And I like her style of really left-footedness, like very, very sweet and non-judgmental and accessible. but also like very wise and very like yoga and just like an amazing human being, one of John's principal disciples. So I would say if I had to pick one, it would probably be Clarice. But yeah, there's so many. I love Jude Hernandez and his story, how he comes from being a really bad person and has this major like conversion. I like Lamar Travers, the really rich guy who like just is basically just says to John, whatever you need, you know, I got it. I got you covered, you know. Um, let's see, a Thomas who's in a wheelchair and he's sitting at the very front row when the wave of conscious light hits him as the first wave of love bliss at the event called the Crescent Moon of the Heart. That was cool. And his sister finding him. That was cool.
There's
JP,
so many
JP,
interesting
I like
characters in this
so
book.
many interesting characters. I know. I was saying like I did a live reading on the last two nights. I'm going to do one again tonight, which I really enjoy doing. I feel like really happy after I've done it. Like I feel like I'm serving a greater good or something. Um, but like I said Monday night before I started, when I go back and I read this book, like first of all, I cry a lot. I'm very touched by the story and many parts of the story. And but it's like I didn't like it's almost like I didn't write it, you know what I mean? It's almost like these characters are real. It's almost like this whole story is somehow real. Now, my psychic friend, she said maybe it is real on some other dimension.
Hmm.
That's one way of looking at it. Who knows? All I know is, like you, I love these characters.
Yeah, I thought sure your answer would be JP, but I
That's
mean
funny. That's
he's
funny that I
wonderful.
rolled around to JP because, yeah, because he's so much like me. I don't even think about him, I suppose. But, yeah. Who's your
Well,
favorite?
that's a good question. I mean, other than I for some reason was really attracted to somebody we talked about in the last interview, Ataye, the young boy. When you
Oh,
mentioned rites of
yeah.
passage, I just for some reason really gravitated to
Oh,
Ataye.
yeah. I don't know how I forgot about Atiye. He's this little Amuti tribesman, right? Pygmy. And he really becomes John's most enlightened disciple.
Right.
Because when John goes through this thing where he crashes down on his disciples in a way that's bigger and stronger than he ever had before, and some of them start experiencing the ascending force, like a true yogi. Well, Atiye takes it to the next level, and he experiences witness consciousness,
Hmm.
which is, you know, very prized. So yeah, Atiye, I can see why you would pick him. He is,
Yeah,
and plus his
there's
affinity
something
with Saint
about
Francis
him that I just had an affinity to, I think. I don't
and
know.
his love of Saint Francis, and how John says he reminds him of Saint Francis.
Oh,
So
yeah,
that makes sense for you too.
that's true because I also, as you know, working on a book on about St. Francis. And
I
uh,
know. It'll be
so
wonderful.
I think in a lot of ways, you and I are on the same plane. We're across the country from each other.
Uh-huh. I see those mountains behind you.
Oh, that's Yosemite, I guess. Yeah,
Oh, cool. I know, I'm just joking.
Half Dome, but. Uh, I really want to thank you, and I definitely encourage everyone to pick up this book and read it because I think it's probably unlike any other book you'll ever read. So it's The
It's
Seventh
it's a good
Avatar
read.
by Justin Bortz, and we'll
Yeah,
be
and
giving you
and
the link to purchase it on Amazon or wherever if you get into a bookstore and it happens to be there, that would be great too. But I want to thank you again, and who knows,
thank you,
maybe
Linda.
we'll have
And
to do
Linda
a
was my
part
writing
three.
coach. Linda was my writing coach and the editor, so she deserves a ton of credit as well. Thank you,
Oh,
Linda.
it was a pleasure. It was, for me, it was something different than I had ever worked on. And I really enjoyed delving into it and participating in it in some way. But I think we're probably all going to be waiting for the next book. I don't know if you've even given that any thought, but I think you
I
should.
have, but I haven't felt like the time is right yet to
Yeah,
start it. I
have to
just
wait.
I haven't felt it yet quite, you know?
You'll be inspired at some point in
It
time.
will be inspired at some point in time and I'll just start, you know?
I'm working on 4 books right now, and I got inspired. We have a young transitional deacon in our church, which means next year he'll be ordained as a priest. And he gave a homily one day, and I said to him, "You know, I'm really upset with you." And he looked at stunned, like, "Oh, what did I do wrong?" And I said, "What you did wrong was you gave me the makings of the 5th book, and I'm working on 4 simultaneously."
That was funny.
And,
A
and
backhanded
I
compliment.
literally couldn't sleep that night. I ended up getting up and on my phone making notes, and the next day I put the outline of this book together and I sent it to him.
Wow. What's it about?
It's called I Thirst. It's about Jesus's request on the cross saying, "I thirst." And the Romans thought he was thirsting for water, but he thirsted for so much more, just as John Franklin did, I think. Wants
Yeah.
everybody to love him and love each other. And so that's when I get finished with the other 4, that's going to be the next book.
Congratulations on that. You're very
So,
prolific.
so you let me know when you're ready for that next one because I'll be looking forward to
Oh,
working with you again.
I will. Thank you
And
so much,
thanks so
Lana.
much for
Pleasure.
being a guest again for the second time with me. And I'll
My
again
pleasure.
encourage everybody to pick up the book and read it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, bye.
Bye.